Gerald and Princess, welcome to Morning News today. Thank you so much for coming into studio.
Thank you for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. This spread looks amazing, by the way. I'll go into that just in a short while. Gerald, tell me about why you started the festival. Tell about the cuisine tours. Why do that?
Yes, well, it's interesting that you call it a festival because it is actually quite festive. It's not in a specific, time. It's something that we do throughout the year, actually. But I mean, we are essentially actually a tour company called JoburgPlaces, exploring the inner city of Johannesburg. And over the years, as we've been telling the story of the city, it's just become so apparent that the story of Johannesburg is a story of migration.
Absolutely.
And it's a city of migrants. And the astonishing thing is, if you really had the time, and you also knew where to go, you could probably eat from over 50 African countries just here in downtown Johannesburg, and then, of course, also from all over the world. So our idea was to tell stories through the food of Johannesburg.
I mean, I was quite surprised to see you listing Syrian food there. Obviously, we know all sorts of people from all over the world have travelled and settled here, but Syrian food I wasn't quite expecting to see, so that's a pleasant find. Princess, I want to, please could you just unpack for me what we have on the table right over here, and your involvement with the tours.
Awesome. My involvement is actually the fun part because I get to go eat and ask the matriarchs of all these different cuisines about what makes their cuisine special and the specific dish special. So I'm going to start over there. My favorite dish, it's the sadza with chimolia and tomato shiva. I call that the African gold because influential people all over the world, especially Africa, were raised on this. You have a grandmother feeding a family of 8 to 12, but if you have African greens, in South Africa we call it morojo. In Zimbabwe they use chimoya. You can feed a family for days without missing it, and it's something that I found very important to put on this menu. I've got carapau, which is a whole mackerel basically, which is of Mozambican descent, but usually they cook it on coals. I've got a fancy oven, so I do it in an oven. I've got the Cape Malay soup, I've got the baklava, and I've got Chinese dumplings, which are actually quite popular at Zwipi Underground Bar. And lastly, but not leastly, I've got a mango lassi, but unfortunately, I've corrupted it.
Yes,
and put a little vodka in it. And it's sinfully blissful, actually, when you try it out.
I'd love to dip into the lassi, but not so early.
Not so early in the morning.
I like the fact that you've, with a Greek baklava, you've also got amakip there on the side. We call them amakip. What's the official name for...
when I actually
who makes it and what,
when I explain it to visitors that we have on what they are, I call them candied popcorn. Because basically that's what there is. But always when I'm doing whatever I put in my restaurants, our menu is very pan-African, but I have to put my personality in it, and my personality is basically South African flair.
Lovely.
So I mix it up a bit.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. You spoke about, we just generally, if you've grown up, I guess, in the township, there'll always be a tomato and onion sauce or sort of cooked salsa, right? What I find interesting is this same thing is quite prominent in Chinese cuisine as well, where you'll find this, tomatoes, onions for breakfast, in your in your rice porridge, etc., etc. So you start to see through food the sort of how similar we are in our cultures and the interconnectedness as well. Tell me about the various the various sort of institutions that you find. What do these restaurants look like? Who's cooking? How are they presenting it to the public? And what should I be looking out for, Gerald, as I, if I'm not coming on the tour specifically? What kind of establishments?
In our case, for this tasting tour and storytelling experience, Bulewa here, Princess Bulewa, our chef, actually cooks everything so that we can make sure, we have the right things ready at the right time for people. But you can, of course, find them all over the city in the quintessential places where migrant communities live. And the best is to go and explore and to chat to the people and learn the secrets. People don't always realize that Johannesburg, for instance, had a massive Chinese community in the early 1900s, just after the major gold rush during the Anglo-Boer War and after. And the western side of town, Commissioner Street, where the police station is, still today is actually known as First Chinatown. If you know where to look, you'll find really good Chinese restaurants and supermarkets. I mean, there's the famous supermarkets on the corner of Miriam Makeba and Commissioner. Of course, I can never pronounce the name. But the lady who actually owns that shop is over 100 years old and knows the entire history of Johannesburg's, migrant Chinese community, for instance. Yeah, and then maybe my favorite dish there would be the carapau, which is Mozambican, of course with a Portuguese influence.
Absolutely.
And then again, if you know where to look in Johannesburg, you'll find Mozambican and Portuguese food all over the city. I'm not talking about the famous takeaway that we all know.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the quintessential food you'll find in Rosettenville, in Troyville, and as far as Alexandra Township, you'll find very good carapau, actually.
Yeah, that's lovely. Your favorite story that you tell on this tour, what gem do you sort of bring out for your visitors that surprises them?
That's such a difficult question. I'm allowed to answer too.
Yes, go ahead.
How do you choose? I think the lassi, the mango lassi, which is fresh mango juice, mixed with a little bit of sugarcane juice and yogurt, actually, reminds me of my favorite places in the city.
Yes.
And those would be Fordsburg, which is quintessential Indian and our Pakistani community, which is a Muslim community mostly.
Yes.
But then on the other side of town, you get what we call Little Addis, the Ethiopian quarter, with its fantastic coffee shops and barber shops and Ethiopian restaurants, etc. And all from India through to the Horn of Africa and those countries you find lassi. And people don't really know it in Joburg generally, but yet you can have lassi, mango and or avo in such incredible places that will make you feel like you've traveled to another country. And then my favorite story of them all is probably the baklava, which is essentially Greek, actually. But it could be Middle Eastern, could be Mediterranean, could be Syrian. And yes, there are very good Syrian bakeries in Mayfair and Fordsburg these days.
Yeah.
But I always tell the story of, because we talk about the Mediterranean, of the Italian immigrants. And the fact that so many Italians came here during the Second World War, originally as prisoners of war. They were on the other side of the Second World War at that stage. And then when Italy switched in the middle of the war, the people who were kept in prison here at Zonderwater, just east of Pretoria, were now no longer the enemy.
Yeah.
And the prison gates were opened and they started integrating with the South African community. And by the end of the Second World War, so many of them went back to Italy and then, of course, found the country in ruins and they all bought tickets and ships, coming back immediately. And that's why we have such great Italian restaurants in Joburg today. If I'm allowed to mention one, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention a name, but it's the famous Franco's in Parkview, who's actually was created originally by an Italian prisoner of war. We went back to Italy, fell in love with someone there, and bought a ticket on the ship back and left a fiancé behind to marry his brother as a proxy.
Oh my.
And she returned and came here on her own later, and they opened a restaurant together. So, wonderful migrant stories in the city, and it is a city that really accommodates anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for those interesting insights, and
Thank you.
I think the tours would be just an amazing experience, first of all, and just some insight into, I guess, forgotten or unknown histories. Princess Bulelwa, thank you so much for your time as well, and these look absolutely delicious. We'll definitely have to make a date to sample some of your wares.
Definitely.
And time now to check in with the Weather Centre.